This is Blake Temez with the Blake Temez podcast, where I speak as a Catholic layman to Catholic laymen about missional living, wisdom cultivation, and legacy building in service of Christ and his bride, the Church. Thanks for being here. The Bible has many passages that could be considered dark. These so-called dark passages of the Bible include stories like the one that was included in the Mass for today, the Sunday Mass reading of Abraham and the command by God for Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Now, without getting too deep into the exegesis of this passage, the full meaning or the various interpretations that have been given to it, we can just acknowledge the fact that many who are encountering the story for the first time, or even those who have heard it many times, will have to admit a certain degree of challenge or discomfort in the circumstance of God's request of child sacrifice in the first place. And of course, this can be contextualized by understanding the surrounding cultures and their practices regarding child sacrifice. And of course, it can be contextualized by bringing to awareness the fact that God was not going to allow the sacrifice to take place in the playing out of the events, and so God knew full well that the request would not result in the death of Isaac. And there's many other considerations that could be included here. But whatever explanations are given, we would do well as ministers, missionaries, or mentors to keep in mind that when leading others in their walk of discipleship, that they'll come across stories like this when they're encouraged to listen more attentively at Mass or to do Bible study of their own. And what to do with these passages will not always be clear. It won't be self-evident how to interpret or make sense of them. There are other passages throughout the Old Testament related to violence and warfare, and there can even be troubling passages in the New Testament when it comes to how to understand some of Jesus' sayings, the actions of the apostles in the early church, etc., etc. There are these instances that do not lend themselves to nice or simple interpretations. They don't fall into the category of inspirational or quotable platitudes that often make up most people's familiarity with and usage of Scripture. The types of passages that can be written in calligraphy and then framed and put on the wall or shared as a quote on social media. And that's all fine, not to denigrate that unduly. But an overconsumption of that type of sharing of Scripture can lead us to forget the narratives that they belong to and how there's often suffering and violence and pain associated with these narratives and the characters that live in them. And so I think that keeping in mind these dark passages of Scripture can have a profound impact on how one practically lives out their life as a disciple. Understanding that even the narrative of Scripture is not always neat and self-interpreting, or the meaning is not always self-evident at the beginning. It can allow us a certain type of freedom in appreciating that similar dynamics will take place in our lives as we attempt to be faithful to God and to follow Jesus as a disciple. You know, there can be a kind of expectation that not everything will be easy, that not every request will make sense, and that we'll need help along the way to persevere through dark or confusing periods in our relationship with God and in our attempts to carry out the mission of Jesus. And we're doing our young people or our peers a disservice when we omit or gloss over passages of Scripture that are not easy to fit into kind of a feel-good, overarching, sense of Scripture. And so, just some thoughts there about the reading for today. If you were at Mass, it may have been something that you were thinking about. And in the case of the binding of Isaac, in preparation for his sacrifice, which was not carried out, and that reading being a part of the Mass during Lent has a significance for what it points us towards. And this is one of the ways that we can make sense of what is happening, and in fact probably the primary way when it comes to the perspective of typology, seeing images of Christ in the Old Testament that point towards the fulfillment that will be had in him, and the reality that Isaac's sacrifice was not necessary because God himself would provide the sacrifice ultimately in the person of Jesus, and that sacrifice fulfilling every one that came before it. And of course, the ram that God provided Abraham is a foreshadowing of that, and we have the fulfillment in the crucifixion, which of course is followed by the resurrection. And so there is a way that in this particular dark passage we have a connection to the light of the resurrection that Christ brings and offers to us. And so with that, I encourage you to think carefully and to pray carefully with passages in Scripture that pose you or those that you're mentoring any difficulties, to seek good answers to them, but not answers that explain away any type of difficulty completely, and that maintain the possibility of suffering and pain and confusion in the walk of discipleship, all the while keeping in perspective the glory of the resurrection that Jesus has made available to us all through his Paschal mystery. And so that is all for today. As always, thank you for your time and attention. God bless you in your efforts. Peace. If you're a young Catholic man or a mentor, missionary, or minister who works with them, or even just a concerned figure in their life, a parent, uncle, whoever it might be on the lookout for the release of a short guide that I'm putting together called Brothers by Blood: How to Forge a New Path for Catholic Manhood. In it, I'll expand on some of the topics in this podcast and give you some points of reflection to see about how you can be a part of a movement that empowers men and brings them to their full potential for their sake and also for the benefit of the church and, by extension, the benefit of all society. So again, thank you for being a part of this, and look out for more information about the release of my guide in episodes to come.